India. So good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to all the people in India. Today we have Professor Shiri Krebs who will give a talk. So first, let me introduce Professor Krebs. So Shiri Krebs. Uh, Shiri Krebs is an associate professor of law at Deakin University and co-lead of the law and policy theme in the Australian Government Cybersecurity Cooperative Research Center. She is also an affiliate scholar at Stanford University's Center for International Security and Cooperation. Dr. Krebs' research focuses on predictive technologies in legal decision-making processes at the intersection of law, science, and technology. Her scholarship has been published at leading academic journals, for example, the Harvard National Security Journal, and granted her several research awards, including the Vice Chancellor's Early Career Research Award for Career Excellence, Deakin University in 2019, and the American Society of International Law New Voices Award in 2016. Dr. Krebs has taught in a number of law schools, including at Stanford University, where she earned with honors her doctorate and master's degree in the science of law. So today, Shiri will present uh, give a talk on predictive technologies is in preventive counterterrorism. So before I hand over to Shiri, I just want to mention some of the protocols in this. First, that the all participants will be muted by default and will have their videos turned off. And please post your questions using the Q&A section only. So there is a Q&A button and you can use that. So you can ask the questions at any time, but the questions will be answered at the end of the session by the speaker. And please also look through the earlier question that have been asked to avoid duplicate questions. And if you have any kind of audio and video problems, you can raise it through the chat window. So without much further ado, over to you, Shiri.
Thank you very much, Arindam, for this very kind and generous introduction. Let me share my screen so we'll have an interesting background while I share my thoughts with you. Let's see, just a second. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my slides.
Yes.
Great. So just before I start with today's topic, I wish to begin by acknowledging that I joined this panel from the land of the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nations, a land that was never ceded, and pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also wish to say that I follow the COVID situation in India with great concern, and I wish everyone to be safe and healthy, and send my wishes here from Melbourne, where we're also now in lockdown. So moving on from reality or our health situation, my presentation today would focus on predictive technologies and the way that they influence emerging preventive counterterrorism measures. So just to kind of have us started, I don't know how many of you watched the UK, the British thriller Eye in the Sky, starring Helen Mirren, which was in the cinemas a few years ago. And this research project really started while I was watching this movie, and the thought that this started to steer. So the movie is about kind of resembling as true to reality as possible the decision-making processes, both in the security agencies, but also in the political sides of decision-making, about a targeted killing operation that really started more as an intelligence counterterrorism operation, a collaboration between US and UK forces and intelligence agencies in Kenya. And the framework that we have is really very heavily relying on AI and technology more generally, so not necessarily artificial intelligence, but also different types of algorithms, different type of imaging technologies, and the movie is really loaded with very sophisticated, cutting-edge technologies that are currently used by counterterrorism agencies and security agencies around the globe. The setting of this movie is really about how the technology and really emerging technologies assist us in this dramatic fight against terrorism and to protect security in different countries. So the outline is, or the backdrop for this is that thanks to the technology systems, we now know everything that we need to know. We know this with great certainty. And thanks to technology, we can even, image different scenarios, and we can anticipate the outcomes of different types of different courses of action. So we can see, for example, right into the house where terrorists hide. We can see exactly the type of weapons they have. We can look them in the eyes. We can really see the white in their eyes, and have a 100 and have our algorithm tell us that we have a 100% match. So this can't be refuted, right? We know for certain that we have the people that we're after. We know for certain what they plan to do because we can see the weapons very clearly. And we can also see, the surroundings. We can see, potential collateral damage. We can see, all the possibilities with great clarity. And so while I was, and so basically the movie says, well, because of technology, because of the way that it shapes our decision-making processes and the way that it allows us to really have all the information that we need, the real question is really an ethical or a moral dilemma of what we should do or what we can morally, ethically do in the face of the danger that we see. And specifically in this movie, the question was, can we conduct an operation that will potentially or perhaps result in the death of this little girl that you see here on the upper left corner, but while doing that, we will also prevent a horrible terror attack that would likely cause the death of hundreds of civilians in a shopping mall in Kenya. So I was watching this, very compelling presentation of, the practices of security and intelligence agencies. And I was thinking there is something deeply wrong with this type of presentation. And the problem is that that it's not just the movie that that provides us with this backdrop for decision making. The problem is that decision makers also see the contribution of AI and other technologies in a similar way. In a way that promotes us to trust the technology and to think that we have all the data that we need and to act based on this indisputable data. So in the next 40 minutes or so, I would try to convince you otherwise, or at least to provide you with some data about the limitations of such technologies, AI and other technology systems in this type of high-level decision-making processes. So I think before we delve into the actual data, I just wanted to bring forward a bit of a background on preventive counterterrorism and the practices that adopt these predictive technologies. So first of all, we need to think about the context, because in the past, counterterrorism was a past-focused endeavor that was, at least from the legal perspective, was really designed as a part of the criminal law system and was basically, we were police agencies and other security agencies were collecting information, not for preventive measures, but really to have enough evidence to prosecute those that are suspected of being involved in terrorism activities. Now, following the attack on the Twin Towers on September 11, 2001, there was a shift, a gradually kind of shift from this past-focused criminal law regime to a future-focused administrative and even armed conflict regime. So now counterterrorism is no longer really a past-focused criminal law endeavor, but really kind of a future-focused attempt to prevent those crimes from being committed. And accordingly, the law that is being applied is also not a criminal law regime, but more of an armed conflict regime that is much more permissive than the criminal law system in what we can do in order to prevent terrorism activities. Now, this preventive legal regime, that is a future-focused legal regime, is supported and complemented by predictive technologies that also, kind of that help us to think about the future in similar ways that we used to think about the past. So we have very sophisticated and widespread extraterritorial surveillance systems put in place. We have drones, including predator drones and satellite imaging that provides data that predict the outcomes of particular courses of actions. And we also have a variety of automated algorithms and big data analytics that uses, human and signal intelligence in order to make some connections and provide more data about suspected individuals. The problem with these types of or this combination, let's say, of a preventive, future-focused legal regime with predictive technologies is the invisibility of the epistemology that this entails, and in particular, the opaque evidentiary standards that are used by those technologies. I think it was a really good example, I think, from the movie itself, where you see the one of the tech guys that operates that runs the algorithms and kind of run the algorithm and tells Helen Mirren, the commander in charge, that there is 65% chance that this girl that you've seen before will be killed if the operation will continue as planned. Now, she looks at him and says, well, but what would happen if you calculate this from this angle? And so he runs the algorithm again, and then he tells her, well, if we run it from this angle, it would be 45% chance that she would be killed. And then Helen Mirren says, well, in that case, let's run the algorithm. Let's leave it at that. Let's run the algorithm from this angle. Now we have 45%. It's less than 50. So according to decision-making standards, I don't have to, have this approved, by higher up levels. And then he looks at her and says, no, we can't do that, because that would be, that would be wrong. The algorithm, originally said, 65%, we can't change it, and we have to have a higher up approval. And so in the movie, the audience is then invited to think that, this is really, horrible that Helen Mirren is trying to kind of change this process in order to get the result that she wanted. However, I was thinking the original outcome was just as arbitrary as the second one. And the reason that there is this gap is because the algorithm that we run do not know everything and have very different data inputs that would result in different outcomes. And so it's not that this is a know-all entity that provides us the absolute knowledge about the world, but this is a human-made instrument that its outcomes are designed yeah, so the outcomes are decided really based on the type of the way that we design the algorithm itself, and also the way or the type of the quality of the data that we feed into this process. So the problem is in current decision-making processes is that these evidentiary standards or the epistemology, epistemological decisions that are being used by those who designed the algorithms are not taken into consideration by decision makers who are often completely unaware of the way that the algorithms are designed and some of the limitations in the way that they can interpret data and provide outcomes. So what are the problems with this visualization technologies, but also more beyond visualization technologies, also big data analytics and algorithms, including artificial intelligence components. So I wanted to focus this on some of the visualization technologies, I think, because it's just easier to explain in a kind of to a broader audience, but I'm very happy to touch more about the other technologies in the Q&A at the end. So there are three main issues that I would like to talk about today. They are technical limitations, human technology limitations, so human-machine interaction issues, and then finally an accountability gap that is driven by visualization technologies and the way that they affect compliance with the law of war, with the legal regime more broadly, and with policy-oriented outcomes. So let's start with technical limitations. So when we have so one of the many ways that counterterrorism now works is by using visualization in order to support decision-making teams, and this visualization, can be supported through aerial photography, through drones, and through other additional means. So the problem with visual technologies or visualization technologies is that they only provide partial data inputs, right? So we have, while we can zoom in and have a lot of data based on those technologies, they do not cover everything, and they have some both time and space limitations. So we collect data from a particular time to a particular time, and we cover a very concrete area. And so while the visuals in those space and time are very clear and very effective, the spaces and the times that are not covered by those visuals and things happening in those spaces and times are invisible to the decision makers. So we have partial data that is very effective, and its limitations are remain invisible to decision makers. We also have some technical limitations built in some of these technologies based on their capacity or the way that they're utilized. And one example for such limitation is that in order to support night visualization, we often use infrared technology. The problem is that infrared technology, while providing great visuals of the surrounding, is colorblind and does not show colors. And so, for example, one issue with that limitation was a few years ago when US forces attacked Doctors Without Borders Hospital in Kunduz in northern Afghanistan. And one of the reasons that the US forces did not identify the hospital as such was that the attacking team was supported by infrared-based visualization that was unable to detect the Red Cross symbols on the building. So while the building itself was somewhat similar, let's say, to the identification points that were received from the forces on the ground, the particular identifications of this hospital, including the Red Cross symbol, were invisible to decision makers in real time. And by doing that, the visual itself was very powerful, and the limitations of the way that it actually represents the reality were invisible, and so influence that very crucial error in decision making. Now, another kind of technical limitation that we should cover is the possibility of malfunction. So while technologies do assist decision makers in real time and provide useful data, which I 100% support, there is a problem that the technology systems would malfunction. And this was one of the problems, again, in the attack on the Doctors Without Borders Hospital in Afghanistan, because some of the communication systems did not work properly, and because the urgency of this matter, the aircraft had to depart urgently, and some of its systems were not fully updated, which created the problem that the hospital, which its coordinates were uploaded to the to the protected target list, were not uploaded into the aircraft systems. So while the NATO forces in Afghanistan did have the coordinates of the hospital listed as a medical facility, the systems, the no target system in the aircraft itself was not updated. And because of that, it did not alert the team that they are targeting a hospital. Again, the problem was that when we are this kind of this is the problem, because when you trust the system to alert you to such things, then you don't use your own abilities and human judgment as much. And not that human judgment is a solution for everything, but it's just important to understand how this human and machine interaction really works together. And so malfunction is a problem in this sense, that when you trust the system for a particular type of knowledge, and the system does not work for various reasons, then there is this problem in following through with the others kind of human-based mechanisms. So I think these are the main things that I wanted to mention that relate to basically the technical limitations in using or relying solely on technologies or predictive technologies in counterterrorism decision-making processes. And we can also, of course, think about others, including limited or corrupt data that is also something that's normally not visible to decision makers. Now, the second issue that I wanted to discuss today is limitations that stem not from the technology itself, so not limits of the technology, but limits in the human-machine interaction and the way that technology affects human judgment. And I kind of alluded to that a bit when I talked about malfunction, but the main issue here is the eroding of human judgment, because when we are trained to trust technological systems rather than our own judgment, then it makes us less sensitive to some of the problems that may arise with the technology, whether it's malfunction or any other type of limitation, including corrupt or missing data. So um, when we have to exercise our judgment on a daily basis, and we have to see things through our own eyes, then we at least have this level of expertise. But when we are trained to trust the technology instead of our own judgment, then two things occur. First, we just learn to trust the technology and are less critical of some of the technological limitations. But also, when the technology malfunctions, we are then unable to effectively exercise our own judgment. The other problem that stems from suboptimal human-machine interaction is that it reduces situational awareness. And by reducing situational awareness, I mean that intelligence is comprised of many different components and can include very, different types of sources of information. Now, in real time and in kind of urgent situations like these, when we have to make decisions quickly under stress conditions, then visual outputs as well as numerical outputs are very easy to focus on, and they shift attention from other types of sources in a way that even if we have some inconsistency between sources, this is being downplayed because of the effect of those technological outputs. So if you have some other sources of data like communications from the ground and other types of intelligence sources, the visualization technologies and numerical outcomes or outputs of algorithms kind of takes away the kind of situational awareness, takes it away from other sources, and focus attention on those outputs particularly. And so even though, and the problem is that because, as I mentioned before, the epistemological limitations of these outputs are not visible to decision makers, they don't really know how the algorithm was designed, or they don't really know what is missing from the picture, then it's easier to focus on those outputs without understanding their full limitation, and then giving less or inadequate attention to other sources of information that may enlighten the picture, or may create a different understanding of the conditions on the ground. It also creates an invisible subjectivity that stems from the fact that data requires interpretation. And so what's normally happening in those scenarios is that we have analysts that analyze the data that is being produced by those technologies, and the interpretation of those analysts becomes a part of those technological based outputs. And so if you have a drone visual, it is now being interpreted by analysts that look at the picture and say, well, what we can see here is a group of insurgents that are, carrying weapons and are on the way, to this direction. Now, when there is an error in the interpretation, it is becoming much more challenging to identify it, because then the interpretation becomes a part of the picture of the visual itself, without the ability to just differentiate or distinguish between what was the original production of the technology and what is now a mix of technological output and human judgment. It is also affected by cognitive biases. So those, invisible human judgments or human subjectivity are affected by a variety of cognitive biases, including availability or anchoring biases, which means that for availability bias, for example, tells us that individuals or decision makers are more likely to interpret situations based on information that is easily recalled. So for example, if they look at a particular visualization or a particular image in a scenario that they are familiar with, they perhaps will be more likely to interpret what they see as insurgents that are on their way to conduct some terror operation, rather than to interpret those as civilians. And this is because usually, when drone, for example, are called to provide intelligence on particular movements on the ground, there it is because there is suspicion that there is some hostile activity, and so availability bias from different or similar scenarios would then make it more likely that the image would be interpreted in a particular way. An anchoring bias means that individuals have this original assessment that's called an anchor, and then they find really difficulty in changing this anchor based on the changing or shifting conditions on the ground. And the problem is that the original anchor itself can be mistaken or erroneous because of the way that technology is interpreted by in those scenarios by the relevant analysts. So if we have a wrong anchor, then ultimately the entire assessment of risk in the operation would also be misguided. And perhaps I'll give another example here. And the other example that I wanted to mention in this case was, maybe I'll give two more examples from Afghanistan, and then I'll have a couple of examples from Israel. So the pictures that you see here in the middle are actually from an operation in Afghanistan from 2010, where a Predator drone team was following 3 vehicles in northern Afghanistan, and determining that those vehicles were carrying insurgents. And as a result, those vehicles were attacked from the air. And ultimately, it was discovered that they were civilian vehicles that were carrying about 31 individual civilians in them, including 3 women and children. So the problem was, again, that the drone team misinterprets the visuals and provided, therefore, so the images that were provided to the decision makers were misguided because they included erroneous interpretation of the conditions on the ground, which kind of hid the human judgment or the subjectivity in those judgments, and was very likely affected by some of the cognitive biases that I just mentioned. Another example was in the Farah province in Afghanistan, where aircrafts followed a group of Afghans in the Farah province and determined that they were all insurgents. Again, this was a night visual, so no colors, and so they couldn't identify the color of the clothing that they were wearing. And the reason that it was decided these were insurgents was that they were walking in a single file, which normally would mean that a group of people walking, in a single file are more likely to be insurgents than civilians. Civilians would be expected to be seen, scattered on larger areas. So the group was attacked, and in the morning it was revealed that about 94 civilians were killed in this operation. The reason that they were walking in a single file was that this was a very, very narrow mountain path in northern Afghanistan, and they couldn't walk in a scattered way. So the terrain itself, determined that they had to walk in this particular way. So this is just an example of how predictive technologies are not something that really resolves every factual uncertainty on the ground, and the way that they're both limited in what they can do, but also limited in the way that they're interpreted because of insufficient understanding of the methodologies and the epistemology behind those technologies. Now, the final issue that I wanted to mention here under the limitations of human-machine interactions and compliance with the law is the problem with accountability. And the problem here with accountability is that even though we have a very complicated scenario with tragic outcomes on the ground, where civilians are being killed based on misreading of the technology. The problem is that the outcome is, in those cases, is usually to blame the technology for erroneous or suboptimal human-machine processes. And I can give two examples here. Perhaps I'll use one example from Israel to kind of illustrate this point. So another case that I thought would be useful here is a case in Gaza, where in the previous, not the recent one, in one of the previous hostilities between Israel and Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, the Israeli forces on the ground instructed civilians on the streets to gather together in a particular house that was the house of the Al-Samuni family. And then at some point the next day, drone visuals depicted 5 men standing outside of this house holding RPG rockets. As a result, immediately aircrafts were sent to attack those men using Hellfire rockets, and the house was destroyed. 24 of the Al-Samuni family members were killed in this attack. Now, in the military investigation into this incident, it was determined that the problem was a misinterpretation of the drone visual, because what happened in reality was not that 5 men were holding RPG rockets in the entrance of the house, but that 5 of the men that were inside the house went outside to bring firewood so they can bake some bread and to feed the 100 people that were gathered inside. And in the visual, those firewood were interpreted as RPG rockets. The result was not only that the IDF itself decided that this was an unfortunate error based on misinterpretation of the drone data, but this event was investigated by the UN fact-finding mission on the Gaza conflict that's known as the Goldstone mission. And following this following this incident, Richard Goldstone, who headed the Goldstone mission and wrote a report saying that this is probably a crime against humanity, said that based on this data, that this was in fact a misinterpretation of a drone visual, then obviously this was not intentional, and therefore no crimes were committed in this case. And this is a big danger, because ultimately what it means is that instead of acknowledging some of those limitations that I just talked about, we basically use them to shield from real and meaningful accountability. And by saying this, I don't mean that I think that war crimes or crimes against humanity were committed in those cases, but I think that we need to move away from perhaps individual criminal responsibility to other accountability measures that can take into account and improve or prevent those things from happening in the future. So one of the things that needs to be taken into account is flaws in the technology. For example, if there was a reason that an algorithm, calculation was misguided or erroneous, we need to perhaps redesign the algorithm. Or if there was a problem if indeed, visuals erode human judgment or reduce situational awareness, then this is something that we need to start training individuals and individual decision makers for, in order to prevent or in order to improve the way that humans interact with machines when they implement this type of data. And so by saying that there is accountability gap, I don't mean that there is a problem because no one is being prosecuted, but there is a problem because we don't really think about this human-machine interaction in a rigorous way that can improve this interaction and prevent death in the future. And just to conclude, a few recommendations in this area. So first of all, I think it is highly important to acknowledge the problem, that even though, and I say this, openly, obviously, predictive technologies provide useful, important amounts of significant, information to decision makers. But we can't really rely on this information thinking that, this eliminates uncertainty and that this is, a perfect new world where we only have morals dilemmas because, we know for sure where we stand with the data. We need to acknowledge the fact that predictive technologies can misguide human judgment, and we need to think about the way that it misguides human judgment. Some ways to improve these processes. And again, this is not, so I think this is an easy example because I could use, those investigations in those cases. And also I think it's really interesting and important, but it's also, I think, useful in other contexts when we trust the product or the outputs of AI and other important technologies. So the first important way forward would be to have a clear transparency about the data collection methodologies, limitation, and quality, including some internal disagreements about how to interpret these outputs. The second important recommendation is to identify suboptimal human-machine interactions in a way that has not been done so far. And the third one that I talked about a bit earlier is to enhance accountability through organizational rather than individual responsibility. I hope that this was informative and useful, and I'm very happy now to talk about some of the things that I didn't have time to touch on during the presentation, including different types of technologies or different types of contexts where human decision-making processes rely on predictive technologies. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Shri, for giving such a nice talk. I really like this talk, and I have some questions of mine, but let me first see whether there are some questions from the audience. Uh, no, at this point, still there is no question. So maybe let me ask my first question here. So, in most of these situations, although an algorithm is algorithm is determining something. For example, say, so there was a probably there is a RPG on those men's hand, or maybe there is some potential terrorist there. But why are they? So, for example, in the movie that you said that there is a 65% probability that the girl will be killed, and then maybe they ran the algorithm and it went to 45%. First of all, I'm not sure how, if there is no some either input changes or some randomization in the algorithm, how the different executions give to different probability. But anyway, I'm not getting into that. But so why are ultimately it's the human who is making the decision, right? I mean, whether to say make this attack, right? Maybe make the fatal blow. For example, if you want to launch a rocket or a missile or some such thing, right? So why are they? I mean, I don't blame it on the machine or the algorithm, right? Because it's a human. So why are they not making the decision when they are absolutely sure? Like, I would rather wait and not kill somebody, right? Unless I am absolutely sure that the target I am hitting is the intended target, right? Say they are criminals or terrorists.
So if I understand correctly, you basically want to know what is my if I have another suggestion for where to put the line on in relying on those outputs.
So basically, yeah, your thing also in terms of the security agencies, right? So what policies do they follow? I mean, don't do they follow very aggressive strategy of, even if I have certain, some high probability also of hitting civilian, but still I will like to go to so that I can preemptively hit some terrorists, or what kind of strategy they follow generally? Because I see these kind of things are quite common, right? I mean, in the US or Israel, they are like this kind of counter-terrorism things, right? It's not that it has happened once. So
So yeah, I understand. Look, I think it's really important to understand that the technology is not supposed to be different from, traditional types of intelligence. So the legal standard that we apply should be the same. The problem that I am identifying is that because the new type of the technologies that we use, we tend to rely on that data as if it was certain rather than what it really is, and without any notice of some of the limitations of the data. So the legal rules, for example, about distinction or proportionality should be the same, right? I'm not arguing that we should change the legal rules in this space. I'm just saying that similarly to what was shown in the um, in the um, in the movie, right? We tend to treat this type of data differently from the other sources that we use, and in a sense, give it more effect than we should. For example, the IDF example that I gave before, they also had information from ground forces that civilians were sent, to take refuge in this location. But because the drone image was so powerful, those other sources of data were pushed back and not given the effect that they should have because of the danger, the imminent danger that the technology created. It was falsely, of course, it was a false danger, but it was so the whole risk assessment was changed based on the type of the data that we have. And while my talk really focused on technology systems or kind of a decision assisting technologies, I think it would be just the same or even more severe when we think about decisions that are made by algorithms. And some of the predator drones, have the technology capacity to decide on their own, to make decisions based on the data they collect. And And obviously that also, so perhaps it would, in those situations, it would perhaps eliminate some of the problems that currently stem from human-machine interaction, but the technological limitations will remain, and the invisible judgments that put into the design of the algorithm will also remain and would be even less visible, because there is no human that evaluates then those decisions before they are being made. And so I think there are a lot of issues around decision-making processes that are currently invisible and not given the type of attention that they should. So my point here is not we shouldn't trust technology outputs, but we should better understand them. I think at the moment, at least in the legal sphere, we think, okay, we have the tech guys, they or girls, right? We have the tech people, and they would, we trust them to come up with a perfect algorithm for us, and now we just use it or apply the outputs. But I think we can't continue in this way. We have to be able to understand the technology better in order to apply it correctly in different scenarios.
Thank you, Shiri. Yeah, I
There are a
like the
few
answer.
questions also. I think we can probably take some of them.
Yeah, so there is a question from Rajeshwari Sridhar. So Rajeshwari is asking, can you explain on avoiding cognitive bias during human-tech interactions?
Let me, I'm not sure that I read this.
So
I didn't hear you correctly. So
so
can you repeat that? I can't find
yes.
it for somewhere on there.
Can you
Sorry.
explain on avoiding cognitive bias during human-tech interactions? So it's about
Uh,
cognitive bias.
yeah. So to explain how cognitive biases apply in this in the human tech scenario.
I think he's inquiring if there are like some particular steps that can be taken to minimize.
Oh, how to minimize the
Yes.
cognitive biases. Yes. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm my screen is for some reason preventing me to actually read the questions. Yeah, so I think it's really important. I actually have a paper that is devoted to cognitive biases in decision making, where I think where I elaborate on some of the issues that can be done. So it is not easy, of course, to resolve biases, but there are already existing several type of modules and trainings for decision makers in order to avoid or to overcome invisible type of cognitive biases. So I think we already know, we are aware of some of those biases in the counterterrorism or security sphere kind of more generally. But I think that what is currently missing is the fact that technology also triggers some of those cognitive biases, and those are less studied. And so what I'm doing now with my existing research is to look at how technology, what type of biases are triggered by technology, and what are the ways to overcome, or how to train people to first be aware of those biases, and then how to kind of overcome them in their decision-making process. And so one of the ways that I suggest in the paper is to create red teams that provide, like in the journalism, that provide alternative explanations, or to bring to the forefront some of the disagreements, if there were internal disagreements about interpretation of data, and to always have people discuss different alternatives, because the problem is in those scenarios that we have groupthink processes where someone suggests a way forward or a plan, and everyone then just kind of anchor from this original planning, rather than be open to different alternatives. So there are different ways to encourage the consideration of different alternatives, and that's partly one way forward.
Okay. Thanks, Shri. The next question is from Abhinav Thakur. He's asking, to enhance legal evaluations, how can we maintain the transparency with the general public when information about the defense technology of a country is highly sensitive in terms of national
Mhm.
security?
Yes, I agree that that this is a big problem, and I think that part of of this problem is that some of this secrecy or confidentiality is not justified. And so what I suggest is really to think about better ways to inform the public and better way to inform transparency. And I understand that this is not an easy shift because obviously security agencies are concerned about their methods of action. But I think that, and this is a process that we also see. My research was based on open sources, so investigation reports of different failed operations. And I think that in the future, it would be highly important to release such reports. So all those examples that I gave from the US example in the US forces in Afghanistan were based on documents that were the outcomes of Central Command investigations. They are heavily redacted, so all the confidential parts were redacted, and I can't really see everything, but still the information there is very useful. And I think that this is a way forward that must be enhanced by public pressure.
Thanks. The next question from Vishal Beniwal. Vishal is asking, as we talked about the accountability, is there any policy of compensation in respect to the loss caused by failure of judgment and technology?
Yeah, that's another important question. Unfortunately, there is no real kind of obligation in international law to compensate. So it's really about the goodness of the hearts of the different countries involved. And in Israel, for example, there is a law, the tort law in Israel prevents from compensating anyone for war damage, even if it was negligence or it was, intentional murder. There is no compensation regime under Israeli law. Um, in the US, there are different regimes, and normally what happens in Afghanistan, for example, is that this is kind of NATO forces and the US forces specifically pay kind of condolences fees that are very low and are done not as a legal requirement, but as a sort of policy that, voluntary policy, let's say. So I think this is absolutely essential when we think about investigations and fact finding, to move away from a focus on criminal liability and the question, was it a war crime or not, and move forward to kind of an organizational regime of, did we do something wrong, or could have been, how can we improve what we've done? And part of that would be to compensate for damage, even if it wasn't intentional and it resulted from a bad algorithm or a deficiency in human machine interaction.
Thanks, Siri. I think we are almost finished with this session. So, and we have another session with you with the organizer. So, let me thank Professor Krebs for a very nice talk. And I mean, I also learned a lot of this about counterterrorism and how the decisions are made here. So, thanks a lot, Shiri, for
Hello.
coming to our talk. Hello.
Yeah, Saptarshi here. So I see a couple of more questions. I think we can take them.
So you want to continue this session?
Yeah, I mean,
Because,
since there are a couple of questions already asked, maybe we can take them. Yeah.
okay, then
I'll be
I'll
happy to
continue with
answer.
that.
Sure.
So the next question is by Rohit Kaliwal. Rohit is asking how to use stochastic process in AI. What about the applications? Which all the tools can we apply for applications using stochastic process?
Um, mm, I'm not really sure how how to answer this in in the time that I have. Rohit, do you want to maybe be a little more specific in what I can answer? I'm not sure what are the applications that you refer to.
I mean, he cannot directly ask questions because he has to go to the Q&A, but maybe if he's typing something, I can go to the
Yeah,
next
so
question.
maybe, let's move to the next one. And Rohit, if you can explain what type of applications you refer to, I'll be happy to come back to this one.
Yes. So next question is from Bishwajit. Bishwajit is asking, who is responsible for the accountability of AI systems? If a decision is taken by an AI system, then is the responsibility lies with the human operator or technology developer or both, and how it should be done in future in general?
Yeah, this is a really big question, of course, in international law and more generally, right? Who is responsible? And I think when AI systems were just introduced into legal decision-making processes, the main question was, we can't really. So the main objection, I think, to AI, in international law, was that we can't hold robots or algorithms responsible, and so this is a big problem. But the issue is that we need to think to separate responsibility. And like I mentioned before, the focus in international law or international criminal law specifically is really about individual responsibility rather than organizational or state responsibility. And I think we need to understand that with the involvement of technological systems, the focus should perhaps move on as well from individual responsibility to an organizational responsibility. And in that sense, I think that, errors in algorithmic applications would then still have a meaningful accountability mechanisms. I also think that the originally, at least, if someone designed faulty algorithms, then they should be responsible for their outcomes. Of course, if we think about criminal responsibility, the issue is that you need to have the mens rea, the intent to commit the crime, and this normally would not be the case. And so some crimes can be negligence crimes, but that's also may not be the case if it was just an honest error. And so in those cases where we have just an honest error, I think these are problems both for AI, fully AI, systems, but also for legal kind of technology assisting, decision assisting technologies. And I think that in those cases, we should really move on to state responsibility or organizational responsibility structures that do not have to find the individual who is to blame, but rather, the organizational structure that needs to be fixed.
Thanks, Shiri.
So I think Rohit has not really furnished more of a question. I think we can probably close the session here. And
Yeah.